Good evening to my listeners, my legendary lunatics out there. It's your host, Jester Jack, as usual. And tonight is a very special night. Well, last night was a very special night, but tonight's a very special night for another reason. We are less than 1 week away from All Hallows Eve. Less than 1 week away from All Hallows Eve. And in celebration of that fact, I have got some very, very special scary stories to share with you tonight. So we're going to do a short reading. Well, not necessarily a short reading, but a reading from one of my favorite scary storybooks from when I was a kid, and one that most of you probably know. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. Now, I'll be playing music by Mew in the background, and I hope you enjoy. I don't know if we'll get through the entirety of the book, but we'll get as far as we can. So, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. Forward, strange and scary things. Pioneers used to entertain themselves by telling scary stories at night. They might gather in someone's cabin or around a fire and see who could scare the others the most. Some girls and boys in my town do the same thing today. They get together at somebody's house, and they turn out the lights and eat popcorn and scare one another half to death. Telling scary stories is something people have done for thousands of years. For most of us, we like being scared that way. Since there isn't a sense of danger, well, it isn't any danger, we think it's fun. There are a great many scary stories to tell. There are ghost stories, there are tales of witches, devils, and boogeymen, zombies and vampires even. There are tales of monstrous creatures and other such dangers. There are even our stories that make us laugh at all the scariness. Some of these tales are very old, and they are told around the world, and most have the same origins. They're based on things that people saw or heard or experienced, or thought they did. Many years ago, a young prince became famous for a scary story he started to tell, but he did not finish. His name was Mamilius, and he probably was 9 or 10 years old. William Shakespeare told about him in The Winter's Tale. It was on a dark winter's day that his mother, the queen, asked him for a story. "A sad tale's best for winter," he said. "I have one of spirits and goblins." "Do your best to frighten me with your spirits," she said. "You're powerful at it." "I shall tell it softly," he said. "Yon crickets shall not even hear it." And he began. There was a man dwelt by a churchyard. But that was as far as he got, for at that moment the king came in and arrested the queen, and took her away. And soon after that, Mamilius died. No one knows how he would have finished that story. If you started as he did, what would you tell? Most scary stories, of course, are meant to be told. One moment. Sorry, we're back. Most scary stories are, of course, meant to be told. They are more scary that way. But how you tell them, now that is important. As Mamilius knew, the best way is to speak softly, so that your listeners lean forward to catch your words. And to speak slowly, so that your voice sounds scary. The best time to tell these stories is at night, in the dark and the gloom. It is easy for someone listening to imagine all sorts of strange and scary things. Princeton, New Jersey, Alvin Schwartz. We'll start with some jump stories. The Big Toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off into his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe to the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved up the toe into 3 pieces. They each had a piece, and then they all did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep almost at once, but, in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out on the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where is my toe?" It groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared. But he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It will never find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where is my toe?" It groaned again. The boy pulled the blankets up over his head and closed his eyes. "I'll go to sleep," he thought, "and then I'll wake up and it'll be gone." But soon he heard the back door open of the house, and again he heard the voice. "Where is my toe?" It groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps moving through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall, and then slowly they climbed the stairs. Closer and closer they came, and soon they were in the upstairs hall, and then they were outside his door. "Where is my toe?" His door opened. Shaking with fear under his covers, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark towards his bed. Then they stopped just beside him. "Where is my toe?" "You've got it!" The Big Toe also has another ending. When the boy hears the voice calling for his toe, he finds a strange-looking creature up inside the chimney. The boy is so frightened he can't move. He just stands there and stares at it. Finally, he asks, "What you got such big eyes for?" And the creature answers, "To look you through and through." "What you got such big claws for?" "To scratch up your grave." "What you got such a big mouth for?" "To swallow you whole." What do you got such sharp teeth for?" "To chomp your bones." Next up. Oh, let me do something real quick. Open.
The story is so scary.
You're scared?
Yeah, I was purposely trying not to listen to this. That story scares me.
I'm sorry, honey.
It's okay.
I need to empty my recycle bin so I can save some room. Oh, there we go. Empty. Empty. Okay, we are good. The next story. The Walk. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was also walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. He was very scared of that man. But they kept on walking. They came to a big woods. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was really very, very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really very, very scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went, and it was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at that man. That man was terribly, very, so scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terribly, terribly, very, so scared of... The next story is called What Do You Come For? Also, if you haven't guessed yet, this section of the storybook is mostly filled with jump scare stories. Stories in which the reader tries their best to scare the listener. So, what do you come for? There was an old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged in terror. Then 2 legs dropped into the hearth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down, then 2 arms, and finally the man's head. As the old woman watched the parts come together into a great gangly man, the man danced around in the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped and he looked into her eyes. "What do you come for, sir?" she asked in a small voice that shivered and shook. "What do I come for?" he said, slowing his dance. "I come for you!" The next one is called Me Tie Dottie Walker, but I was never a huge fan of this one, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this. The next 2 are, it looks like poems. A Man Who Lived in Leeds. Some say this rhyme doesn't mean anything. Others are not so sure. There was a man who lived in Leeds. He filled his garden full of seeds. And when the seeds began to grow, it was like a garden filled with snow. But when the snow began to melt, it was like a ship without a belt. And when the ship began to sail, it was like a bird without a tail. And when the bird began to fly, it was like an eagle in the sky. And when the sky began to roar, it was like a lion at my door. And when the door began to crack, it was like a penknife in my back. And when my back began to bleed, I was dead, dead, dead indeed. The next one is actually not a poem, it's a song, but I don't know the tune, and I can't quite read music without the first note, so I'll go ahead and skip to the next section of the book. He heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs is the name of this next chapter. There are ghosts in this chapter. One comes back as a real person, another takes revenge on her murder, and there are other strange happenings. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office, talking about one thing or another. But there was a field of turnips across the road, and suddenly they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark it was hard to tell for sure. And then it was gone. But soon it appeared again, and it walked halfway across the road. Then it turned around and went back into the field. Then it came out a third time and started towards them. By now, Ted and Sam were very scared. They started running. But when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon they saw it, and it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants and a white shirt and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try and touch it, and then we'll know if it's real or not." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes, sunk deep in back from its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed. And again he and Sam ran, but this time the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched. It stayed out in the road for a while, and then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat with him each and every night. And the night that Ted died, Sam said he looked just like that skeleton. Cold as clay. A farmer had a daughter for whom he cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the county. Soon after she left, Jim got sick, and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart, and the farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death he could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have had together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock at her uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. But soon he complained of a headache. "It aches something terrible," he told her. She put her hands on his forehead. "Well, you're as cold as clay," she said. "I hope you are not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Well, didn't you send for me?" she said. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable and looked for them. The horse was there. It was covered with sweat and trembling in fear. But there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father told her about the truth of Jim and his death. Then quickly he went to Jim's parents. They decided to open up his grave, and Jim's corpse was in his coffin. But around his head was tied the girl's handkerchief. The White Wolf. The timber wolves around French Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers could not stop them from killing the cattle and the sheep. So the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt they turned in. A butcher in town named Bill Williams thought that sounded like pretty good money. He stopped working as a butcher and started killing wolves full time. He was good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000. It was quite a bit of money for those days. After 4 or 5 years, Bill had killed so many wolves that there was hardly any left in the area. So he retired, and he vowed never to harm another wolf because wolves had made him very rich. Then one day a farmer reported of a white wolf that had killed 2 of his sheep. He had shot at it, and he hit it, but the bullets didn't seem to have any effect. And soon that wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, but nobody could stop it. So one night, it came into Bill's yard and killed his pet cow. Bill forgot about his decision never to harm another wolf. He went into town, and the next morning, bought a young lamb as bait. He took it out into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down there under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited for that wolf. When Bill didn't come back, his friends started looking for him. Finally, they found the lamb. It was still tied to that tree. It was hungry and weak, but it was alive. And then, they found Bill. He was still sitting against that other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. But there was no sign of a struggle. His gun hadn't even been fired. And there was no tracks in the soil around him. And as for that white wolf, he was never seen again. I think we'll go ahead and end there tonight. What do you think of those stories? What do you think of any of the paranormal? That last story in particular, the white wolf. Do you think there really was a wolf, or do you think maybe since he'd killed so many wolves, a revenant was created to hunt down Bill and exact revenge on all the wolves he'd killed? The story before that, with Jim being cold as clay. Or what about Ted and Sam with the thing that crawled out of the beet field? I don't know which one's my favorite. And hell, tomorrow we might do some more. But I like reading these old stories. I like reading just stories in general. There's a lot of really good ones. But as we get closer to Halloween, the videos, they might get a little more scary. I hope you enjoy it, because I know I do. As always, remember to sit back, relax, and enjoy the darkness around you, because if you don't, maybe Jim will come out and do it. Oh, and if you find a toe in your garden, leave it the fuck alone. Good night, guys. Love you.